Nathan, you have I don't even know what to call it, a product, a system. You're one of the founders of something called Standard Carbon. Can you,
Product at this point. Yeah.
yeah, can you tell me what it is and what it
Yeah.
does?
Standard Carbon takes the what's coming out of the chimney of your boiler, and it removes the carbon dioxide from that exhaust going out the chimney and turns that carbon dioxide into natural gas. And it does that using electricity, which ideally will come from a renewable source.
Got it. And I actually saw one of your videos. I forgot if it was on your website or if you posted it on LinkedIn, but you actually had you were connected to a car's exhaust.
It's my car.
And then on the other end, you lit a cigar. I'm assuming it's the same process. You're capturing the exhaust and then creating natural gas, which then is
Correct. When we tested the system, we hooked it up to my car, put a brick on the gas pedal. Of course, it's a lease, so whatever damage you do to the engine, it's on the leasing company, not me. And then the natural gas we produced at the other end, we wanted to create a visual. So in the effort of being politically correct, we thought Cuban cigars would be the most appropriate way to show the natural gas that we produced from the carbon dioxide emissions coming out the tailpipe of the car.
Right. And is there an application for New York City buildings? I know that just in separate conversations, you said that the ideal candidate is some sort of industrial or commercial facility. But, does it work for a New York City apartment building?
Absolutely. The best application is, like you said, probably larger scale, but the origins of the idea was my work in New York City. The issue with New York City buildings is that they're 100 years old oftentimes, and it's really difficult to heat them other than with the existing boiler, steam system, and everything you have in place. And so if you can keep that boiler and steam system exactly as is, and then just remove the carbon dioxide from it and do something useful with that carbon dioxide, you can essentially decarbonize the heating system of your building without demolishing what's already there. And that's a huge advantage. And that's where what we're doing is applicable, because we can install our product right next to the existing boiler, capture the exhaust from the boiler, convert the CO2 in the exhaust into natural gas, feed that natural gas back to the boiler, and run the whole thing off peak electricity or from solar panels on the roof, electricity from another source.
But that's a good point. My understanding is that in order to recycle the exhaust gases back into natural gas, you're using a process called electrolysis. Is that right? Is that the term for it?
So diving into the technical aspects, there are three main processes inside the Standard Carbon box. There's carbon capture to separate CO2 from everything else in the exhaust gas and isolate it so you have pure CO2 that we can work with. There's electrolysis, which is using electricity to split water into hydrogen and oxygen, so we have hydrogen. And then there's the third part, methanation, where we combine hydrogen and carbon dioxide together to produce methane. And methane is the primary constituent of natural gas.
Sure.
So,
but there is a considerable amount of electricity that this product consumes in order to turn it back into methane.
Absolutely.
It consumes. Is that a deal breaker for a lot of buildings? Is it going to pencil out?
So assuming that you can get electricity from the grid at off-peak times, or that you can install solar panels, then it's a home run. So I was shocked. I looked at the locational based mean pricing for Manhattan, and excuse me, I have a cold here, more than 20% of the time, the price drops below 2 cents a kilowatt hour in Manhattan. So it's possible to get off-peak, really cheap electricity. Also, if you're generating electricity on site with solar, that solves the whole issue as well.
And you're doing or you're discussing a project currently in a New York City apartment building where solar is a component of it, I understand.
So the project that we have the informal go ahead is a multifamily building in Brooklyn. And actually, it's a complete home run because they're going to install our system with solar panels. So all the electricity that's needed is going to be generated on site. They're going to get the full value of those solar. If they didn't have us, then they'd have to export to the grid and get paid pennies on the dollar relative to the value of the electricity they're producing. And because it's coming from solar, they're going to get the full Inflation Reduction Act tax credits. So we're looking at a simple payback of less than 2 years for the whole system to decarbonize the building. So the building's going to be carbon neutral, and they're going to make a fortune in the process.
And presumably that plays into local law 97 as well, and has some benefits there, and that the emissions are averted.
We're not even taking into account the fact that we eliminate their local law 97 penalties in our analysis, because the value of essentially producing free natural gas for the boiler from solar panels on the roof, plus the tax credits, is so enormous that we didn't need to even discuss local law 97 penalties kicking in 2030 to justify the investment.
And I understand that this building that you're in discussions with, they've optimized their steam heating system. And so that was one thing that allowed this to work, for basically their solar installation to provide enough to cover the load, essentially.
Yeah, these owners have done everything possible to take a building built in the 1930s and make it as efficient as possible. So their annual gas bill of about $30,000 a year, that includes domestic hot water and heating for a 50-unit multifamily building. That's about half of what we typically see for a building that size in New York City.
Right.
And the reason why it's so low is because of the work they've done to make it as efficient as possible. If they had not reduced their load to that extent, then we wouldn't be able to make the building carbon neutral. It's really because they've done the hard work of doing all the boring stuff already over the years. Now we can come in with something really exciting and push them to 100%.
Now I'm curious, let's say they were more typical and they hadn't reduced their fuel usage as much. Understanding that they couldn't become carbon neutral, does it still work? The numbers.
So the financials would still work. What makes it work financially is the fact that the electricity is coming from on-site solar panels.
Right.
The wild card with a building which doesn't have rooftop solar is we don't know if we're getting electricity from the grid, what that means as far as tax credits. We also then have a more complicated task of getting off-peak electricity pricing. So it's really simple and a home run if you have on-site solar.
Yeah. Might that be a viable package moving forward, that, in future applications, you actually might want to do the solar in tandem with this?
Absolutely. They did not do solar in the past because they had no place to use the electricity. So this gives them the load to justify the solar investment, and the solar developer will finance the entire deal. So that's really a win for everybody. They go to one bank, so to speak, the folks that are putting in the solar panels, and those guys are more than happy to finance this as well, because this is what's justifying the whole solar project. So packaged together, it makes the whole thing work. And they said they would not have done the solar project if it wasn't for what we're bringing to the table. They're installing everything at the same time.
Interesting.
So I would say the only difference with a typical building is if, you know, we could perhaps drop the carbon emissions by half as opposed to eliminate them entirely if the building's not as efficiently operated. So
Sure.
it's still worth it to do the boring stuff, like I said.
Right. Wow. That's something. And then you mentioned you get the Biden Inflation Reduction Act tax credits. Well, you get the tax credit on the solar side, which my understanding is back to being you can actually redeem cash for it.
Yes, it's a credit.
Right.
It's so it's
You don't need a
it's
tax appetite in order to,
no,
right,
it's money in your pocket. I don't think many people appreciate yet how much money is on the table with the Inflation Reduction Act in
right,
so many different areas. So in our case, we're talking about our hydrogen production aspect. That's where the subsidies or the tax credits are through the roof. But in so many other areas as well, energy efficiency measures, carbon capture, you name it, they literally have opened the floodgates to an enormous amount of money
right.
that is going to really change the landscape.
Well, and that was the other one I wanted. So you have this, assuming you were to do solar and standard carbon. So you have the solar investment tax credit, but there's also, as you were mentioning, the hydrogen production credit. Is that the other thing that you would be
Correct. You'll get
entitled to?
the green hydrogen production tax credit, the solar tax credit,
Mhm,
potentially the carbon capture tax credit in our case as well.
mhm.
So as I said, it's just a fantastic amount of money from Uncle Sam. I always joke when I speak to folks about this in Europe and they criticize the United States when it comes to climate issues. I say, yeah, you know, perhaps the US is slow, but when we do things, we do it on a scale like the likes of which the world can't imagine, has never seen. And that's definitely the case. The Inflation Reduction Act is so much money. It's literally caused the European Union now to pass legislation to match the rebates because all of their manufacturers are saying there's no point in us doing business in France because we just want to sell in Texas because of this new law. It's a huge opportunity.
Very cool. And so if someone someone listening to this said, hey, I've got a multifamily, let's say in New York City, what would be the next steps that they would take? What would be the next steps on your part?
I would tell them if they have the ability to install solar in the building or they already have solar in the building, then it's a home run and we should do something. If they don't, then it's a more complicated analysis, still worth exploring, especially if they are looking at very large local law 97 penalties.
Sure. Oh, and finally, how big is this thing?
About the size of the boiler itself. So smaller boiler, our equipment's going to be smaller. Larger, more boilers will take up more space, but it more or less matches 1-to-1 in terms of space.
Very interesting. Very cool. Well, thank you. Thanks for walking me through it.